Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to online events and our session Landscapes of the Heart, the working world of a sex and relationship therapist with Juliet Grayson. Juliet, a warm welcome to online events.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Lovely to have you with us for this hour this evening to talk about your work and to dig into some writing and your book. Yeah, there's lots to talk about. I also want to say, oh, you've got the book there, great. So the book title is actually the title that we've got for the conversation as well, isn't it? Which is great, so yes. I also want to say a warm welcome to everybody who's joining us live. So if you've got any comments or questions or responses for Juliet, please feel free to use the chat room and the Facebook chat comments. If you're here in the library with us, it's great to, you won't have the chat, but we're sure you're going to enjoy this hour too. Juliet, could you say, before we get into the book and the writing and the experiences, could you say a little bit about yourself, where you are and the kind of work that you do? Would that be okay?
So I'm based in South Wales, in Chepstow, and I am a sex and relationship therapist. So I've been a therapist for 25 years. And I really only see couples or people with sexual problems. So I tend to weed out clients who come with other issues because that's my absolute passion and focus. And my other passion is a particular methodology that I use because I not only run one-to-one therapy sessions, but I also run groups using a particular kind of method called the Pesso-Boyden system of psychotherapy. That's Pesso-Boyden, which is a body-based psychotherapy, which I absolutely love. And I think the reason why I love it the most is that if someone has a good session, if the client is ready and if I'm on track, it's the therapy that gets places that other therapies don't get. And I think a good session it's equivalent to 6 or 9 months of talking therapy, one session of Pesso-Boyden. So I find it the most extraordinarily effective method, and I have 5 groups that I run between South Wales and London. And they're all ongoing groups that meet regularly, and really those are my 2 passions, the couple work and helping individuals with sexual problems or couples with marital problems, and then the Pesso-Boyden work.
Okay, yes. There's lots to talk about in all of that, of course. I mean, it's very tantalizing to get into that, like, how can it be so powerful? And I think we're going to have more conversations, maybe a little bit of that tonight, and maybe we'll have another hour, particularly on that modality, which sounds...
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah.
Really fascinating. Yes.
Yeah. So in relation to the book, half of is I really started writing the book about my couple work. So it's a series of, if you like, case studies. It's a series of examples of me working with individuals or couples. So basically, I think there are 5 couples in the book, or 4 couples and 1 individual. And what I'm doing is letting you get a bird's eye view of what goes on in the therapy room. So the way I work is that I tune into my own feelings and I connect to that and I describe that in the book, but I also jump inside the client's skin and I imagine if I was sitting there listening to Juliet saying this, how would I be responding to this? And another skill that I've developed is the skill of what we call micro-tracking, which is something that we use in the Pesso-Boyden system, which is the art of really reading the micromuscular changes in a face. And what that's given me, having learned how to do that, what that's given me is an ability to see someone's reaction to what their partner, for example, is saying. And I use that a lot. I bring that into the room a lot. So it might be that she's talking about something, some situation that happened, and I'll say, did you notice how loving he was in that moment? And it's passed her by completely because she's cross with him. Or maybe she is talking and I suddenly see a flash of anger go across his face and I help him to express his anger. So it's one of the skills that I learned in the Pesso-Boyden system, but I find incredibly valuable in my work with couples. and I bring that into the book too. So you kind of get a perspective, not only from my view and my internal sense of what's going on, but also I jump into the client's perspectives and try and give you a sense of what's happening for them. And people seem to say that I've got it, you know, I do a fairly good job. So that's rather lovely. I appreciate that.
That's very nice feedback to get, Juliet.
Yeah.
That must be very satisfying. Yeah,
it's great. It's great. Someone bought the book last week and emailed me and said, "This is bloody brilliant. I'm really enjoying it." And that's just, you know, that's just fantastic.
Yeah, so, that must be the best thing as an author, to get that direct feedback. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's great.
Yes.
It's great.
Well, and one of the reasons we're having this interview now is because the book has been entered into a competition. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Basically, what's happened is that my publishers put it forward for something called the People's Book Prize, which is an annual award, and it's been put into the non-fiction award, non-fiction category. So only 20 books have been chosen for that list, and it's people vote, the public vote, and I'm kind of hoping I might make the shortlist in that category. And it would just be so great because I'm up against books on all kinds of things, you know, diabetes and anything you can think of. And it would be really wonderful to have a therapy book making the shortlist, or even more wonderful, winning, because what that would do is mean that the information gets out to the wider public more. And I'm passionate about spreading both the wisdom of going to get help for your relationship early on, because most people tend to leave it too late, or they don't leave it too late, but they often leave it 3 to 5 years after they should have come. And it's the more entrenched behaviors are, the harder it is to change them. So if I could get one message out there, it will be come early for your couple therapy issues, because the sooner you come, the easier it is to remedy the problems that are going wrong, and the more likely we are to help you stay together. Whereas actually, because people are shy or ashamed, they tend to put it off for a bit. So if the book were to get out there more widely, then what that would mean is people would get the message, come sooner, the help's available, it's effective. And also, because I'm so passionate about Pesso Boyden, and that's half the book describes how that methodology works, I'm also very keen to get that out there, both to clients, but also to therapists, because I'd love more therapists to have access to it.
Yes, well, with that kind of power, as you say, like 6 to 9 months of therapy in one session, it sounds very compelling, for sure.
Yeah.
Like, I think we have the link to vote on the book, and like, vote. There's 24 of us here online right now. Like, though 24 votes could make quite a bit of a difference in terms of this, where the voting is right now.
Last time I checked, I was 40 votes behind the one that's leading. So if we persuade those 24 people to vote, and if they happen to have 2 email addresses, you can vote once with each email address. So that would be 48 votes. That will put me in the lead.
Okay.
That would be fantastic for therapy. And the rules say that you don't have to have read the book in order to vote, which is very helpful. So if there's anyone out there who feels willing and wants to support therapy getting more publicly accepted, then please go to the link on the website, click the People's Book Prize, and it takes you straight to the page. It only takes a minute or 2 to vote. It's not a long one. So I'd really appreciate it, please. I'd love it if you did that.
If we can, to all the colleagues who are here with us live, I think, well, there's 24 of us here in Zoom. I think there's more on Facebook. If you can use that link to go and vote, I think what you're saying about a therapy book getting that much exposure just feels really important. And if everybody has one friend that they could share that link with, make a vote. There's also some voting strategies you're recommending, I guess. It could make a real difference. I wanted to, so the link's there if anybody can vote on that. That would be fantastic.
And the voting is open until the 15th of March.
That's the other thing. So it's time to do it now, isn't it? And to get on that right now, because there's only a couple of weeks left.
Yeah.
Fantastic. What, like, as a non-therapy person, a non-therapist rather, would be reading this book, what is it about the book that would help them to come into couples therapy? Because I mean, getting into therapy isn't that easy, and especially for a couple, and maybe what they need is to bring their sexual relationship, I guess, is part of the work that you're doing. So what is it that would help?
One of the things I think is that usually one person brings another in a couple. So usually one person is very motivated and one person is less motivated. And my job as a couple therapist is to make sure that it's of benefit to both people and to help them both see what the point is early on. And the vast majority of couples who come to see me, something like 95%, stay together. Very occasionally, I wonder if that was a good thing when I meet them 10 years later and they're staying together in a slightly bitchy relationship. But nevertheless, that tends to be what happens. Most couples who come to me stay together. And what they're going to get if they read the book is, some little tricks and techniques. So for instance, different ways of thinking about things. There's a very simple model, which is the 3 parts of a relationship: the ideal, the ordeal, and the real deal. So the ideal is the romantic phase where you're passionately in love, you're obsessed with each other. The neurochemicals connected to that are the same neurochemicals that are linked to a cocaine high. So we're literally getting high on our partner. And of course, that's a very attractive phase of a relationship. And people don't realize that lasts for between 6 months and 2 years, that ideal phase. And then what happens is you move into the ordeal phase. So that's like the power struggle phase where, who's going to do the washing up, who's going to put the bins out, who's going to look after the children, who's going to do this, that, and the other, who's top dog, who's bottom dog. All of that stuff needs to get sorted out. And if you get through that, and some couples don't, but most couples come to see me when they're in that ordeal phase. If you get through that, then you get into what I call the real deal. I mean, if I say I call it, actually, the model, I think, comes from Harville Hendricks, although I've never been able to find it in his writing, but I think it was his originally. Anyway, the 3rd phase is the real deal. And that's when you get to the stage where you're working together and you're feeling in harmony with one another. And most of the time, you're working as a team. And that's the kind of pair bonding phase where the first flush of romance has gone. You're no longer in that obsessed with them phase, but actually it's a very sweet and very loving phase. But a lot of couples get stuck in the ordeal phase and they can't find their way through into that real deal phase. And of course, you might make the real deal, but then something happens and you go back into the ordeal again. So it's not once you're there, that's it. So sometimes couples need to come back again because they had couple therapy, it helped them slide towards the real deal, they have a good relationship, and then something happens and whoosh, it's gone back and they want some support to move forward. And, if someone's trying to learn a skill in life, we expect to be taught how to play golf or how to ride a horse, but we don't get help in how to do relationships. It's assumed that we will know how to do them. And actually, relationships aren't simple. And just getting a little bit of kind of support, a little bit of guidance, someone who's outside of the system and can see it differently can make a big difference. So, I really recommend that people who are struggling come early, as I've said. Go and get yourself some help. And if you've got clients who are individuals and you don't feel like you as a therapist can work with a couple, then you still see the individual for one-to-one therapy and send them off for couple therapy with someone who's experienced at doing that. I do think it's a specialist skill, couple therapy. I started becoming a couple therapist. I trained as an individual one-to-one therapist. And then I had a couple who came and I saw them and I did okay with them, but I thought, oh, there's more to this than meets the eye. And so I went off and found a 2-day weekend workshop. And I just loved it. I just absolutely found my niche. And so then I signed up at the Maudsley Hospital and I did 2-year training there. 1 year was on relationships, 1 year was on sex. And we used to have lectures in the morning and clinic in the afternoon. And we'd have a one-way screen. And behind the screen, there would be anything from 2 people to 20 people. And they were all watching what you were doing with a couple in the room. And if they didn't like it, there was a telephone and they'd ring in and say, Juliet, we want you to ask this question now. Or Juliet, you should be going in that direction.
Oh my goodness. And was this like a real couple that had come?
That was a real couple that had come for couple.
Oh my goodness.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's incredible pressure. And I guess the couple knew that who was on the telephone. They knew.
They knew there were people behind the screen. They didn't know if it was 2 that day or 25, you know, because it was just a one-way mirror. So all they saw was the mirror. So they didn't know, they had no idea who was behind, but very occasionally at the end of therapy, the couple would say, can we meet the rest of the team? And then everyone would file out into the hall and they'd see and shake hands with all 25 people, you know, that would be
amazing.
Something. And they say, golly, I didn't know it was that many.
Yes, yes. What is it about couples that you just fell in love with, Juliet? What was it?
I think that everybody deserves to have a good enough sex life. And everybody deserves to have a good enough relationship. And, you know, sometimes you don't have to do so much just to tweak it, to move from an acrimonious relationship to something that's more soulful or harmonious. And I don't know, it's just something about it. Perhaps it's my nosiness. I love hearing about people's sex lives. I think that's a great job to do.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure. And also the other thing that since I've been doing the Pesso-Boyden, which I've now been doing for about 15 years, the way that works is that really looks at what are the childhood issues that are being triggered in the current day situation. So for example, Al Pesso, the co-founder of the method, he used to say that present consciousness is a, hang on, let me think. Present consciousness is a tapestry woven of memory. In other words, what's happening now and the way you're responding to me is based on your experience with other people, you know, other people recently and perhaps other people in your past. So if I've had a father who was very tall and aggressive, and then I have a boss who's very tall and aggressive, and then I have a husband who's very tall, I might expect him to be aggressive. And it's like I've got a hot button that he only has to be the slightest bit aggressive. And because I've had that in my history, I'm oversensitized to it. And what we do in the Pesso-Boyden groups, and I love it when couples come and they work with me as a couple, but also when they join one of my ongoing Pesso-Boyden groups, because it really moves the work forward more quickly. And what we do is we would have someone in the group representing an ideal father who says, if I'd been your ideal father, I wouldn't have been aggressive in that way. I would have been gentle, I would have been kind, I would have been loving, whatever it is that the person needs. We call it the antidote, to antidote their current experience. And basically what we're doing is we're using false memory. We're deliberately planting an alternative memory. It's fascinating because it always chooses the best option for itself. So if you give it another option that is believable, and you have to make it really believable, and the client has to find it really believable, but you help them create this alternative option that's completely tailor-made to their particular issue, and it really can change how people feel in their current relationship because it's no longer loaded with that loading from history. Another example would be when someone yearns, let's say, for approval, or they yearn for nurture, which they didn't get sufficient when they were a child, and maybe they marry someone who in the ideal phase of the relationship, in the romantic phase of the relationship, looks like they're going to deliver that because they're giving them attention and they're giving them time and they're giving them, you know, everything they want. And then 18 months, 2 years later, the novelty's worn off and now they have to do their work and they no longer prioritize the relationship, they prioritize work instead. And the person can feel very let down and very hurt because they're yearning for something that should have come in their childhood and they're looking for it from this current partner. And what Albert Pesso said is that the healing has to happen with the right kinship relationship at the right time, at the right age. In other words, if I needed approval when I was 6 years old and I didn't get it then, and let's say you were my partner, you could give me masses of approval, but it would never hit the right spot inside me. So however much you give me, it never fills me up. And eventually you get fed up with giving it because you say this is a bottomless pit. Nothing I do is enough. I get resentful because you're not giving me what I need, and I think you should be doing it for me. And actually, you're not the right kinship relationship because you're my partner, and I needed it from a parent. And I don't need it now. I needed it for the 6-year-old part of me that still lives inside of me. So what we do in a pest avoidance situation is we get someone to role play my ideal father, who would say, if I'd been there when you were 6, I would have given you all the approval you needed. I would have told you how proud I was of you. I would have loved you in the way that you needed loving. We physicalize it. It's an embodied antidote. So we try and put something physical into that situation, whether it's even just a hand on a shoulder, or it might be a hug, whatever the person needs, what the client wants. And that's very powerful. And then the yearning from the partner isn't there in the same way because the deep need has been satisfied. So I love being able to bring together the pest avoidant work to work and heal the early deficits or the early trauma that the client has, and then in a room with just the two of them, do the couple work with them. And that's, for me, the absolute best kind of way of working. It really excites me, as you can probably tell. I
can absolutely see that. And theoretically, it makes a lot of sense what you're saying, Juliet.
Yeah.
Like, I think there are lots of us in life who have some form of that kind of experience. The bit that's missing, we continue to look for, but it's out of our awareness.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in the book, I talk about other things. So there's a model that I use, which is very simple, very basic, oversimplified really, but people find it useful, which is the pleaser, the boss, the loner, and the developer. 4 characters. So the pleaser is the person who is over cooperative and wants to fit in and wants to make the relationship work, and often puts themselves one down, and goes out of their way, perhaps a little too much, takes their partner to the station at 5 o'clock in the morning, whatever it is, puts themselves out, then gets very frustrated and feels like a martyr. I'm the one who's always doing this. You never do anything. You kind of hear those things. So that's the pleaser character. And of course, they mesh very well with a boss character. So the boss is the person who stifles the other one a little bit, who has a particular idea about how their partner should behave, who perhaps thinks that when their partner gets a bit drunk, or when their partner gets a bit frisky in some way, or whatever it is, they feel ashamed, as if it's a reflection on them. And one of the things I try and do with couples I work with is to help them differentiate, so that what my partner does is a reflection on him, it's not a reflection on me. And so I'm not responsible for his behavior. I can talk to him about how I want him to behave, and we can have conversations about that. But at the end of the day, if he's in a situation where he's angry with someone and he shouts at them, that's not my, it's not a reflection on me. And if I wouldn't behave that way, that's my business. And I shouldn't necessarily stop him from doing what he naturally does and his natural style. So, inevitably we want to shape each other. But the boss character will be stifling, will be squashing, will be shaping the other one. And then you get another character, which is the loner, who can't cope with the intimacy. And so their way of dealing with that dynamic is to pull back. So they're like a lone wolf, or sometimes they're a lone wolf and a bit kind of superior in a way. Sometimes they're like a little mouse and they're a bit inferior. They pull back out of fear. Maybe they don't have a relationship, or they have a relationship, but it's very distant. I had a friend who, I love her dearly, but she keeps choosing partners who are either in another country or somehow unavailable. And it's her wolf part of her that's not wanting to really engage in a relationship. And she says, why do I keep doing this? But she keeps doing it. It's a pattern. And then the 4th character is the developer, the person who develops themselves to the point where they can differentiate. So for me, differentiation is about being able to have an emotional connection and being able to have autonomy. And finding the balance between those two driving forces that all of us have, and some of us, so the pleaser will go for the emotional connection over the autonomy, and the boss will go for the autonomy over the emotional connection. And actually what we need to do is be able to move up and down that continuum between the two, and the ability to be able to be really myself and be really in a relationship. We call that differentiation. It's a term from biology, and it's so that cells differentiate. So one cell is the soft skin on my cheek, and another cell is the hard skin on my nail. And both of those cells are doing their job within the system of my body. They're completely themselves within the system of my body. So how can I be myself within the system of the relationship? And sometimes you'll hear people say, I have to get out of the relationship in order to find myself. And actually, what I would say is relationships are people growing machines. So they help us to really find our sense of autonomy and our sense of self and the sense of connection. And our partners often will challenge us and rub up against us to help us to try and push us to do that. And some couples manage it and some couples don't. But the developer is the one who is really conscious of that and moving towards operating from the best in themselves and that quality of differentiation. So that's one of the models in the book, and it's a theme throughout the book. And I also run trainings for therapists about how to work with couples. I run a 6-modular training, and that's a theme throughout the training, because I think really that's the essence of being a couple, is how can I accept who I am and be me and not yet withdraw from the relationship or overpower the relationship. And it's a real dance to be able to do it. It's not easy.
Not easy at all. And do you have some not easy and no magic bullets, I think, for that? I mean, there's a sweet spot, isn't there, between connection and autonomy? But do you have any exercises or things that you do with the clients to help them kind of develop those capacities or develop?
I think there's kind of 4 things to be aware of when you're thinking of that. So one is that you need to have a clear sense of self. Who am I and what do I want in this situation? And then another is that you need to manage your own anxiety. You need to compose yourself. So I have a little model. It's a 5-star model. And the middle of the star is breathe, because part of what's needed all the way through everything is to be able to stabilize oneself. And the breath is a really good way of doing that.
I think I've got an image that you shared with me. Should I show that just now?
Yeah, you got it. That'd be great. Yeah.
Let's see if we can do that just now. Is that coming up on your screen?
Yes.
Great,
That's it.
Great. Yes.
So so breathe is in the middle of the star, and this is about operating from the best in yourself. We can all operate from the best in ourselves or operate from the worst in ourselves, clearly. And so this is how do I be the best I can be? And the first thing to check is, am I operating from the past or am I operating from the present? And that's that thing that I was talking about am I being triggered because this reminds me of my father who was aggressive, and this person is reawakening that old memory. And so my hot button, my oversensitivity is there. So that's a really important question when you're in any challenging situation to kind of be aware of. And then where am I coming from? Am I in the pleaser at the moment? Am I being over accommodating? Am I withdrawing and pulling back in a way that means my partner can't possibly reach me? Am I being in the boss place and trying to stifle my partner and not really giving them space to have their view? Or am I in the developer where I'm in the best of myself and able to be in my most generous self? And we all move around those 4 characters. So we don't just get stuck in one, but we tend to have one that we prefer. So we can flip, but there tends to be one we go to mostly. And then it's about holding on to the best of ourselves. How do I really be the best me without getting over defensive, without getting overly aggressive, without buckling when I should be standing up for myself? Or if I'm a boss, what I need to do is soften and accommodate the other person rather than, so it depends which is the place I'm coming from. as to what I need to do. If I'm a pleaser, I need to stand up for myself and put my point of view. If I'm a boss, I need to soften and I need to listen to the other person more. So holding on to my best self. And then the second thing is to compose oneself. So soothing my own anxiety, not letting myself get overly stressed, calming myself, staying grounded. So in a discussion or an argument or any challenging situation at all, how can I hold on to myself and take that long breath out, which moves me from the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight-flight nervous system, into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest. So just 3 long breaths out. Breathing all the way to the end of the out breath is one way to very quickly soothe oneself and calm one's anxiety. So the next stage of that is to clarify, what is it I really want in this situation? So, you know, in my last row with my partner, there was a moment when I could hear the screeching in my voice getting more extreme, if you like. And I stopped myself and I thought, what do I want here? Do I want to really shout at him and slag him off? Or do I want to negotiate about how we're going to manage this situation? And as soon as I clocked it, I could catch it and say, actually, what I want in this situation is to negotiate. And by bringing that into the forefront of the mind, it helped me alter my behavior to be able to be more effective in achieving that. So clarifying what is it you want? And if you get what you want, what's in it for the other person? Because often when we set a goal for ourselves, but we forget about how it might be for the other person. So it might be something as simple as, I'd like to borrow the car. You know, we've got one car, I'd like to take the car and I'd like to take it today. But if I take it, I tell you what, I'll drop your dry cleaning off at the dry cleaners on the way. You know, what can you do? How can you dovetail the 2 goals together, yours and your partner's, so that you both get what you want rather than neither of you getting what you want? There's a story of 2 young women who are cooking in a kitchen, 2 sisters, and they both need an orange and there's 1 orange left in the orange bowl. So they cut the orange in half, and actually what one needed was the orange rind for her cake, and what the other needed was the orange juice for something she was making. So if they talked, one could have had all the rind and the other could have had all the juice. So it's always interesting to work out, you know, what is it you want, and to be clear about that and see how it might dovetail with the other person. And then what are the consequences of getting it, both in the long term and the short term? You know, it might be beneficial in the short term, but in the long term, is it actually going to be more harmful for you to get this? So if I win this argument, let's say, win in inverted commas, you know, am I going to pay for it later with my partner? You know, would it be better for me to be generous this time round when it doesn't matter to me that much, so that next time I've got some extra brownie points and I can call in a favor, if you like? So consequences. So clarifying really what it is that you want in a situation. And then committing to seeing something through, committing to tolerating the discomfort of changing your behavior. You know, if I'm someone, my natural place is the pleaser end. So I tend to give and give and give and then get resentful that I've given too much. That's my natural place. And when I stop doing that, of course, at first, my partner is not happy because he's used to being able to push me a little bit and me giving way. So the first time I stand up for myself in a different way, or even the 10th time I stand up for myself in a different way, he's going to try and push me into the old behavior. And I have to tolerate my discomfort at him walking out the room or being in a huff or whatever it is. I have to tolerate my own discomfort so that I develop the new behavior. And tolerating discomfort for growth is one of those key relationship skills that really helps couples. Meaningful endurance is another way of expressing it. And confronting myself, you know, what's my part in this? Where am I actually creating a situation that's making it worse rather than better? And if I just soften my tone of voice, if I slow down. You've probably already picked up, I can get very enthusiastic and talk a lot, you know. So sometimes I need to slow down and breathe, and just remembering to do that gives him a little bit of space in the relationship, and that can quieten things down again. Considering my non-verbals, so consider is the next one. So tone of voice, probably most of the people here watching this know that there was a chap called Marabian who did some research into the communication, and he broke it down into the words themselves, the tone of voice, and the body language. And I don't know whether you can even guess what the percentage importance of the tone of voice was, but it was 7% for the words, 38% for the tone of voice, and 55% for the body language. So what that means is that 93% of the communication is tone of voice and body language, and the words are only 7%. Now, they're a very important 7%, but they're a tiny fraction. So if I say to you, you know, are you really going out in that? You know, that I'm sending a whole load of messages in that, which is different from, are you really going out in that? You know, it's a whole different communication just by the inflection of my tone of voice. And if I put an angry face with it as well, it sends a completely different message. So being aware of the nonverbals, being aware of the other person's perspective, really trying to step into their shoes and think, okay, so what is it they want in this situation? Why are they getting angry? Why are they getting upset? Why are they getting quiet? Whatever their pattern is. And for me, one of the key things in any relationship is generosity. If you can find a way to be generous to your partner, to be generous about their motives, to be generous about giving them space or listening to them or trusting, not in an inappropriate way. You know, if someone's had an affair or whatever, then obviously there are going to be trust issues, but trusting that actually you two are working together as a team. And if you can get that teamwork together, that's when things are going to work best. So generosity, I think, is one of the things that in my current relationship has really got us through a lot of tense moments. And, you know, I think it's a vital thing for couples. So it's a little model, the 5-star model: breathe, check, compose, clarify, commit, and consider. And that's one of the things that's in the book. And I use it as a basis for my couple work. And if they begin to take it on, it really does make a difference to how they communicate with one another.
I really like that model, Juliet. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing the image with us in the conversation tonight. I really appreciate that too. And you also saying some things about how it's useful for you too, I guess, in your relationship and what. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah.
You know, I think any relationship is work in progress, and it's very easy to get complacent. This is my second marriage. And in my first marriage, I definitely got complacent, and I learned a lot from that. It was his idea to separate. It was the best thing that ever happened to me, him separating, you know, him leaving.
Okay, yeah.
I realized that I had kept myself very constrained and in a cage of my own self-doubt and limiting beliefs. And, you know, when he left, I kind of just began to throw all of that off. I could never have done this when I was with him. It would have been beyond, you know, just not possible. But, you know, he gave me the gift of separating, and actually it spurred my personal development journey off, and bless him for that. You know, it was great.
Wow. It was lovely to be able to see like the real gift that's come from that moment in your life too. Yes. We've got some things in the chat room and some questions by email. Maybe we take some time to have a look at that, Julia, if it's okay. Paul in the chat room saying, great, the model is on page 99 in the paperback version. Very specific. Thank you, Paul. So yeah, encourage colleagues to jump into Amazon and grab the book.
That's great.
99. And saying, thanks, Juliet. Great to be reminded and great to see you. So that's nice too. We also got a question, I think, from an incurable romantic, perhaps, saying, can we ever get back to the ideal phase? Is that...
I've got bad news for you. I think we touch it for moments, but I think it's, there's a very good TED talk by a woman called Helen Fisher, Fisher, about the 3 kinds of love. And there are literally different neurochemical patterns attached to the 3 types of love. And I think the bad news is that the romantic phase doesn't really come back. I think we have moments when we feel more towards that. And sometimes after you've been through another ordeal phase, you touch the ideal phase for a little while. But I think the honest truth is not really. It's
not really.
Most of it at the beginning while it's there, because, and in a way, although it feels very good, it's also a very blinkered time, because Helen Fisher's research shows that we are, as I said earlier on, I think we're the same neurochemicals that an obsessive compulsive has. No, maybe I didn't say that. We have the same neurochemicals as an obsessive compulsive has. And actually, what we're doing is we're seeing only the parts of the person that we want to see. We're not seeing the whole person, and we're often projecting onto them what we hope will be there rather than what is actually there. So, you know, they say love is blind, and they say that for a reason. So it has some qualities that feel very, you know, like a drug addiction. It feels great for a while, but actually I think the real deal is the sweetest phase, because then you're into a sense of, you really know the person, they really know you, you really allow yourself to be seen by them, they really allow themselves to be seen by you. It's a deeper sweetness for me than the romantic phase, which is kind of more of a false high, if you like.
Yes, that
real deal every time.
Okay. Well, that's encouraging. Or we might be a bit discouraged if we think we can't get back to that place. But of course, empathy is such an important, it's incredible drug for love. I think empathy is so powerful. Yeah.
And you know, sometimes my first husband would be quite angry with me about certain things. In my family of origin, we didn't do anger. So I found the angriest man I could, and then I married him. And like you do. And I didn't realize until we split up 10 years later that that's what I'd done. And really, he was holding all the anger and I was holding all the niceness in a passive aggressive kind of nice way. But now I've forgotten where I was going with that. What did I say? I've lost my track of thought.
Well, something about empathy being such a powerful drug for love, I guess. Well, such a sweetness that isn't available in that first phase. I'm not sure if that's where you were going, but it's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, but I've lost it. I can't remember why I was saying that. But anyway, let's move on.
Let's move on.
Let's move on.
Yes, there's a couple of questions that came through email that I want to catch. Well, definitely one talking about males who've had attachment experiences in early childhood. Maybe their mother has had some postnatal depression or went back to work very early on in the child's experience. So not so much attachment, but a separation experience.
Yes.
And asking like a question around how does this affect adult relationships, and could this be worked through PBSP, which I guess is that. Yeah.
So what I think when someone has that early loss from a mother figure, then there's often a fear, a very, very deep-rooted unconscious fear that you're going to get abandoned again. So that can lead someone to say, I've got a client in my mind as I'm saying this, that can lead someone to say, I'm not really going to take the risk to love you because you might leave me. So, and then there's a distance that comes in, and then the partner feels that on some level, and it gets in the way of the relationship. You know, there's a kind of a lack of trust, if you like, that the person's really going to be there for them. I do want to be clear, I don't believe in unconditional love in relationships. So I think love in relationships with partners is conditional, and it's conditional on, you know, both of you behaving in certain socially acceptable ways. And anyway, that's a little sidetrack. So coming back to the person who's been abandoned, they may half expect their partner to abandon them, and they might even start testing their partner by pushing them away or behaving inappropriately. to see if their partner will leave them and recreate that childhood experience. And the way I would work with that is in a PES avoidant group, I would bring someone in to represent the kind of mother who would never have left. And to start right from the beginning, right from the very early moments, because if someone's suffering from postnatal depression, often they can't bear to be with a child. It's too strenuous, it's too straining. They may not make the eye contact that a young baby needs. And in PES avoidant, we can have, I can remember a guy that I worked with who was in his 50s, but he lay in the lap of, with his head in the lap of someone who was representing his ideal mother. And she just eye gazed. And for about 20 minutes, they breathed in rhythm. He looked into her eyes, she looked into his eyes, and it was the most moving experience. And you could almost see it rebuilding him from the bottom up, from the inside out. And, you know, I've worked with him since, and he says that was a completely transformative moment for him. That, you know, since that moment, his life is different and his relationship is different. And I don't know any other method where you can do that kind of contact and touch in that kind of way that really puts in an alternative experience. And the ideal mother would have said things like, if I'd been there, I would have done this right from the very beginning. And I would have been a happy and contented mother. And you could have called on me. Whenever you called, I would have been there for you. And so just feeding in the messages that he needs to hear. In fact, he was the client. He said to me, you help me to work out what I most want in life, but didn't know I wanted. And then you give it to me using the ideal parents. You help me to work out what I most wanted in life, but didn't know I wanted. And then you give it to me using the ideal parents.
Wow,
so,
that's incredible, Juliet. Incredible.
Yeah, we can do this very deeply reparative work, either about trauma or about deficit, you know, too much coming in that's frightening, or too little and the basic needs not getting met. And all of these things, they affect our relationship so much.
Yeah.
And if we can heal them and put that sense of the healing back in time, so the person imagines having always had that, and people say, if I'd always had that, God, my life would be so different. And then they go out in the world and they say, my life is different. I'm looking at the world differently because of what I've experienced.
Yeah, amazing. Well, what a beautiful description of an incredible piece of work, Juliet. Thank you very much for that. I noticed we haven't said much about, we've only got about 10 minutes left, but as often the way in therapy, we haven't said much about the sex part of the therapy.
Yes, yes.
And easily get, and that often is the way in therapy too, it gets eased out of the conversation. And
my wish would be that all therapists in the first session, in the first assessment, say to their clients, you know, what's your name, what's your address, details, 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 and how's your sex life? Because what I hear from clients is, I waited for my therapist to raise it. And what I hear from therapists is, I waited for the client to raise it. Yes. And actually, I think if we just say it on the first assessment, then what that does is it lets the client know, even if they say, it's fine, you know, in a slightly, voice, it sets the sense that they can come back and talk about it later on. And if they come back and talk about it with a therapist who isn't trained for that, that doesn't matter, because the therapist can say, this isn't my area of speciality, let me refer you to a specialist. And they can still see that therapist for the one-to-one work and go and get some sex therapy separate. So I think a lot of therapists are afraid of it themselves and afraid of raising it because they don't want to hear what the answer might be. But my request for the good of our clients would be that we all introduce it very, very early on. And, you know, with good supervision, it's amazing what a therapist can do. So, you know, if you have a supervisor who isn't skilled in that area, contact someone else for specialist supervision and just get one or two or just get a few sessions while you're seeing this particular client. And that can be enough for you to be able to work with someone who maybe has an erectile problem, or maybe has vaginismus, which is where the vagina goes into a spasm and won't let a penis in. You know, there's a lot that one-to-one therapists who are not trained in this can do with the right supervision, or if it really is beyond their skills and beyond their scope, then they can refer on to someone else and do the other work, but have someone do the sex therapy work. Yeah. But I think it's vital, and it's such a core part of life, and it affects so much how we feel about ourselves. And most people aren't getting as much sex as the media might have you believe. So, you know, that's another thing, is all the myths that get put out. There's a chapter in a book by Bernie Silbergeld. It's called 2 Foot Long and Rock Hard All Night. And that's what guys tell each other in the pub, you know, but it's not the reality.
It's not normal life, is it? Exactly. Well, it takes me back to what you said pretty much near the beginning of our conversation, that your belief that everybody should be having a good enough sex life. And like that's something that therapy can help lots of people with. Absolutely. I guess. And as therapists, if we can get that question in early, and I wonder if there's colleagues thinking about doing that extra bit of training to be able to engage in those conversations. What kind of capacities would you think a therapist might notice in themselves that would allow them to do the sex therapy part of the work, you know, that goes beyond just the conversation?
You have to find a way to be able to ask people if they masturbate, and to be able to hear the answers. So one of the exercises I do on the couples training workshops that we do is I get people to imagine who would be the most difficult person for you to ask, and often it's my father or my mother. And then I get them to sit opposite someone and imagine that they're talking to their father or their mother, and then they have...
Wow. That's quite an exercise, Juliet.
Yeah. Well, it just opens up, you know, some people find it very easy, but many people, I can't say that, you know. So that's just one quick little kind of, you know, thing. Can you talk about that? Even women, you know, we don't talk about the style of masturbation that we use. You know, we don't have those conversations. You know, do you go round and round, or do you go up and down, or do you go across? You know, all of those things, we don't talk about that. And being able to have those conversations with someone is important. And you don't have to be able to do that from the start, but you have to learn how to do that. And so there are trainings out there. My training will help a bit with that. And there are other trainings out there that help us to get more comfortable with those conversations.
I think that's a great measure of, like, am I ready as a therapist to get into that next bit of training? Would I want to? And a colleague was asking on Facebook, what kind of training or qualification do you believe is suitable for counsellors transitioning to couples work? So it sounds like colleagues could come and do your training. And
I've put on it 6 modules, and people can do just one module, or they can do all 6 modules, so they can choose. If they do all 6, then they get a certificate in couple therapy. If they just come and do one module, then they just get a certificate of attendance. And the modules are 2 days each, and we do couples in conflict, the fundamentals of working with couples, dealing with affairs, communication and difference, meeting their partner's needs, which is about early attachment and how that impacts on you, and sex, arousal, and aging. So those are the 6 modules that I put on, that I think gives you a very good grounding in couples work. And some people who, you know, have had good life experience and are competent therapists already in one-to-one work, just after 1 or 2 modules, they'll feel ready to start working with couples. And other people feel like they want to get all 6 under their belt before they start working with couples. And I also offer a deal that once you've done the 6, if you want to come back and just sit in on them all again, or 3 times or 4 times, you can do it as many times as you want. We don't charge you second time around or third time around, because I think it's very useful to get the knowledge over and over again. So subject to space, depending on the size of the room, we really encourage people to come back and have another dip through it. I know that's really worked for me as a participant, to be able to redo a course. And I really want to support people in being good couple therapists. So that's
what a lovely offer. I really like that idea. Very generous, generous, Juliet. Yeah. We've got just a couple of minutes left, and there was, well, a big question, but maybe we could just say a little bit about, perhaps, a colleague asking whether, if domestic violence emerges during the couples counselling work, is it possible to continue the therapy? And like, can the couple get back to, well, could they go to the last bit of the phase? What was it? The real deal? Could a couple with domestic violence get to the real deal? Yeah.
Yes, they can, I believe. And it depends on the situation. So I think relate, if there's domestic violence, I think relate, stop work and send the person off on an anger management workshop, you know, to do that. My feeling is that they're probably going to stay as a couple during that time and they need help during that time. So I keep working with them. It depends on the scale of the domestic violence. So, you know, I had one pair of couple who were both professionals, and she had poured a glass of water over him in bed and he had lashed out at her and she'd broken 2 ribs falling against the chest of drawers. You know, that's domestic violence. It wouldn't occur to me to stop working with them. You have to be aware when working with domestic violence that sometimes if you're working with them both in the room at the same time and let's assume it's him who's being violent, which isn't always the case, but let's just for the sake of this conversation for the moment, assume the man is being the violent one. And she says something that he doesn't like. The risk is that he's going to beat her up when he gets home or when they get home. So you have to be careful about what's safe, and you have to try and make an evaluation of that. And it may be that I would recommend that they both have individual therapy whilst also having couple therapy. And in an ideal world, they go off to individual therapists. And with the client's permission, it can be really helpful for the 3 therapists, me and the other 2 therapists, to do joint peer supervision so that we know what's going on and there's no secrets in the system. Because often, and I had a couple where I worked with in this way, and her perspective on what was going on was so different from his perspective and my perspective as a couple therapist that it was really useful to hear about her view and have that in the mix explicitly.
That's very interesting. Yes, I've never heard it thought about like that before, Juliet. That's very interesting. And would you charge extra for that, like for thinking about from the business point of view, or you just, I guess you're looking for the permission for the supervision? And
yeah, no, I wouldn't. I would just include that as, you know, it's so helpful to me to be able to do that supervision jointly that I wouldn't charge extra for that. No, that would.
Yeah. No, that's very, thank you for answering that practical question too, because I'm sure there's colleagues will be wondering that. And I think that's a very interesting way to hold a container for a couple who are in that extreme situation. That's very interesting, Juliet. Thank you.
And sometimes, you know, I have people who've sent couples to my PESO Boyden groups, for example, and then they continue to work with one or both of them separately. Or they've sent their general clients to the PESO Boyden groups because it can move it on very effectively. You know, they come and do a session, and then the ongoing groups meet once every 3 months or so, 4 times a year or something. So, you know, they can do the one-to-one therapy in between times, and then I do the PESO Boyden thing and kind of give it a jump forward, and then they go back to the normal therapist for the one-to-one work, and that works very well. So I've got groups. I've got one in Chepstow in South Wales, one in Bristol, one in Oxfordshire, and one in West London. And we are starting a new PESO Boyden training to teach therapists how to do this body-based psychotherapy, because it's just so effective. So we're starting a new training. We're doing one in London starting in October 2019, and in Bristol starting in October 2019. So if anyone's interested in that, then, you know, they'd be very welcome. And the details of everything is on my website. They can access the different websites from there.
Fantastic.
I've got a residential PESO Boyden workshop coming up in a couple of weeks, the 5th to the 8th of March down in Somerset, and I've got a couple of spaces on that. So there are things, if people feel intrigued and they want to come along and have a look, there are some PESO Boyden supervision days if they want to just come to one day and see how I supervise trainees. There are some in London and some in Oxfordshire coming up. So I really want to get the word out about all of this stuff. I think it's really important. I think it's really effective. The couple work is important. The PESO Boyden is important. So I'm really keen for people to find out more about it, come and experience a day and see if you agree with me. about the effectiveness of the method.
What a wonderful invitation. Sandra's put the links to your website in the chat room. It will also be in the resource guide too. So any colleagues who are listening aren't on our email list, jump on the email list right now and it'll come out. Oh, and there's a book too. Get over to Amazon, order the book. There's lots to do.
Amazon or my website, Landscapes of the Heart. If you go to Amazon, you get the second edition. If you go to my website, you get the first edition. And if you want me to sign it, just send a note and I'm very happy to sign it for you.
Fantastic, Juliet.
And don't forget to vote if you get a chance, because I would be very grateful. The People's Book Prize, the link's somewhere, I'm sure.
I'm definitely going to do that tonight myself. And Sandra, if you've still got the link that you can pop in the chat room, that would be fantastic. If you can do that before we close the chat room. And if colleagues are watching in the library, these links will be in the resource guide. That if you just scroll down the web page, you'll be able to click on the resource guide and open up. There was one more question, but it was around stops. So, and I think we're going to do an hour on that work together. So maybe we can hold that question and do that together.
Shall I just give you the headline? STOPSO stands for the Specialist Treatment Organisation for Perpetrators and Survivors of Sexual Offences. And I set it up with some colleagues and I'm the chair. And what we're aiming to do is to allow people who feel attracted to children or feel like they're going to commit a sexual offence to come for therapy before they act out. Ideally before they commit the first offence, definitely before the second offence or the third offence. So we have 200 therapists trained across the UK and we would like more therapists. So if you're interested in that work, then please come and join our training. There's a certificate in, a professional certificate in working with sex offenders, which is a 10-day training. The basic training is 3 days. There's a wonderful conference that we're doing on May the 1st in London, which is going to have a neuroscientist from Canada talking about, he's studied the brains of paedophiles and he's found that the brains are literally different. They're likely to be 10 or 12 IQ points less than the general population, 2 centimeters shorter than the general population, 3 times more likely to be left-handed. These are people who are sexually attracted to children. And that is all formed in the 4th and 5th month of pregnancy.
Wow, that's fascinating.
So he's going to be talking at the conference. There's a big organisation in Germany where they offer free 100% confidential therapy to anybody who's at risk of hurting a child. They're going to be there. Simon Bailey, who's the National Police Chief lead for child abuse in the UK, Chief Constable Simon Bailey, he's going to be talking and I might be saying a bit as well. So,
right, okay, great. That's the 1st of May this year.
And we're also planning to have a perpetrator talking about his experience of having therapy. So someone who's committed sexual offences and a family member who's experienced what it's like when to suddenly find that your partner has committed sexual offences, which is horrific. So that's all going to be at the conference on May the 1st. So, the website for that is stopso.org.uk. So anyone who wants to can check up there.
Yeah.
It would be lovely to have an hour on that because I can talk about that forever. So
that would be great, Juliet, if you could come and do an hour on that and come back and talk to us more about the pest avoidance work. I think that would be fascinating. Yes.
Yeah, very happy to. Thank you.
Well, it's been a jam-packed hour, Juliet. We've got through a lot. Thank you so much. I'm glad you've been able to come tell us about the book and the competition, but also I feel like I've learned loads, and I'm sure the colleagues who've been with us here live and in the library feeling the same. I can see that in the chat room as colleagues are putting in some feedback, so that's
great. Lovely. Yes. Well, bless you. I've had a lovely time, actually. It's been great.
I'm so glad you've enjoyed it, Juliet. Thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you to everybody who's joined us live.
Yeah.
The recording. And I guess till the next time we can be together, we'll say goodbye for now.
Lovely. Take care. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye for now.